In my ongoing quest to review as many games with 3D polygons where they don't belong as possible, I've reviewed games such as race driving on the Game Boy, as well as a handful of SNES games that utilize the Super FX chip. Now, I'm not sure why 25-year-old games with shoddy, untextured polygons fascinate me so much, but that's just the sort of person that I am. This has all led me to a game called Virtua Racing on the Genesis and Mega Drive, released in 1994 by Sega themselves, or more specifically, our main man, Yu Suzuki. Virtua Racing's story did not start on the Genesis, however, instead originating in the world of cutting-edge arcade technology. Sega had just developed the Model 1 arcade board, and to show off its chops, they produced a proof-of-concept F1 racing game to show off its totally wicked sick 3D rendering capabilities. Rendering at a blister-inducing 9,000 polygons, and over, the concept was so popular that it morphed into a full commercial release. Ostensibly, it is the first 3D arcade game to render at 60 frames per second, but also to show human characters, the models of which were later used as the basis for the Virtua Fighter series. It was also wildly popular because of its multiplayer mode that supported between 4 and 8 players. But what of a Genesis port? How could such awesomeness be achieved on such a platform? Well, I'm sick of being on camera, so let's transition to some gameplay and discuss the subject further. The Sega Virtual Processor, or SVP for shorts, is what's to thank for this technical marvel of mid-90s console 3D rendering. Created to contend with Nintendo's Super FX chip, because of course it was, it boasted a higher and more stable frame rate compared to its arch nemesis. What it didn't boast, however, was cost efficiency. When Virtua Racing was released, it cost $100 in the US and £70 in the UK, which was considered quite high unless you were Australian and had to deal with EB Games' monopoly. As such, Virtua Racing is the only game on the system to include the SVP. Virtua Fighter and Daytona were planned, but were ultimately pushed to the Saturn to be doomed. Doomed! Just kidding. So how does it perform and what do you get? This version has all 3 levels from the arcade, which are Big Forest, Bay Bridge, and Acropolis. There's also a free run mode that lets you practice the tracks, as well as multiplayer. While up to 8 Genesises can't be linked together, as cool as that would be, there is instead split screen 2-player, which is impressive when you consider how hard the console must be working. As you can imagine, the 3 tracks do fulfill their usefulness quite quickly. At the end of the day, there isn't really that much content here, but considering it is basically a proof of concept that was commercialized, that's not all that surprising. The multiplayer should provide some replayability at the very least. As for the racing rules, well, they're bog standard. At the start of the race, your polygonal race car is at the rear of the pack of the other polygonal race cars with the goal to be number 1. There's also a timer counting down, which is refilled by hitting checkpoints in time. However, if you run out of time, whatever position you're in at the time is counted anyway for some reason, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Just make sure you're in the first place before the clock expires, and you'll be okay. There's even a rudimentary damage model to the vehicles. If you crash too many times, the car will then drive slowly. This is remedied by a drive through the pits, which will give you a time bonus, but will also lose you quite a few positions while you await repairs. So, probably best not to hurt yourself too much. And this leads to a good point. What is basically becoming a cliche of vintage races at this point, if you fall too far behind, it's just about impossible to regain a position. Whether you're a fan of it or not, rubber banding is not a feature of Virtual Racing. When you start a race, I'd recommend getting as far in front of as many opponents as you can, because once they're ahead, they're gone. If you can, I'd also recommend avoid hitting the rear of other racers too. Doing so will completely stop you in your tracks and even push you back a little bit, which spells doom for your pole position. The problem is, the render distance doesn't help you spot these foes at all. It's all too easy to gain a bunch of speed and then suddenly crash into the back of someone, and doing so is incredibly annoying. It's hard to be angry at the game for this since it's doing so well as it is, but it certainly shows the limits of the SVP. The steering and general handling are quite good, as is the frame rate, and while it's only 15 frames per second, which doesn't hold a flame compared to the arcade version, it's still quite fast for what's going on. Almost too fast. Compared to something like Super Race Effects, where it slogs along, there you can actually grasp what's going on. Virtua Fighter seems too fast for its render distance. I know that's a petty complaint, but its SVP-induced awesomeness can actually be detrimental on occasion when you can't see what's coming up. Otherwise, the 3D is employed well. For instance, there is the VR view. Not what you think, I assure you, but while playing you can choose from 4 different viewpoints. While nothing special today, I'm sure this versatility would have blown some minds back in the day. There are also instant replays, with funk. Overall, the 3D is definitely a treat. While not quite as detailed as the arcade version, which is hardly surprising, it still represents the levels much as they were in the arcade, but with a lower poly count. You've got your animals, which are apparently ghosts, you've got boats, you've got windmills, and you also get what I assume is the Acropolis itself. The models and environments are untextured, but it's colourful enough that I'll give it a pass. It still amazes me that this is running on the Genesis hardware, even with a custom processor. The sound department on the other hand isn't too bad, incorporating plenty of voice samples with fun but short snippets of peppy music. It does get a bit repetitive after a while, and it is a shame that a single music track won't play for the entire race, but this is a graphical showcase after all. I'm willing to give the audio a break. The SVP was destined to be its own module for the Genesis, but I guess Sega must have been over the little add-on phase by that point, as it never saw the light of day before the Saturn was released. Disappointingly, the instruction manual also promises a Sega steering wheel, for even hotter, arcade-style driving action. But this too never saw fruition. But before you run out and buy this game, please note that it's not compatible with all hardware. The cartridge is humongous for one, but it will not work on the 32X add-on or cost-reduced hardware such as the Genesis 3. The 32X did see its own version however, which included 2 extra cars and 2 extra tracks. There's also a Saturn port released soon after that included 7 new tracks and 4 new cars. And while there is a PlayStation 2 port as well, those in the present day would be wise to give the Nintendo Switch version a crack instead. Newly released, as of last month actually, this M2 developed arcade perfect port has been receiving positive reviews all over the place. It even includes online multiplayer, which is just too damn cool.